Hello, everyone. We're waiting a few seconds for everyone to join from the waiting room. Welcome, everyone. This is Sabrina Paganoni, and this is the HEALEY Center weekly webinar. As you know, we normally talk about the platform trial, but since late last year, given the new exciting initiatives around expanded access, we have a monthly webinar, one week a month. We talk specifically about expanded access. And tonight, I'm here, as always, with our patient navigation team. Alison Bulat will moderate the Q&A portion of today's webinar, and Catherine Small is here and available to answer your questions also by phone and by email outside of this webinar. And thank you, Catherine, for posting helpful information in the chat as always. And Jesse, our administrator, is here and helping facilitate the webinar as always. Thank you, Jesse. If we can go to the next slide. Again, this is our weekly webinar. Next slide. And most importantly, tonight, we are incredibly excited to have two fantastic guest speakers. They need no introduction. I'm sure that many of you are very, very familiar with tonight's speaker. We're very happy for the leadership on so many things. But for tonight's webinar, we are in particular thankful to them for everything they have done and continue to do to support expanded access in ALS. And so I'll let them introduce themselves. But without further ado, I'll turn it over to our first speaker, Rick.
Well, thank you so much, Sabrina. It's great to be with you all tonight. I sure wish I still looked like the guy in that picture. Man, that must have been from about 20 years ago. Jesse, could I have the next slide? So most of you know I'm a neurologist. I run the ALS program at Duke University. And I thought I would just spend a couple minutes telling you where my head is right now when it comes to these expanded access programs for people living with ALS. Next slide, Jesse. So 23 years ago, I decided that my job would be to get up every day and try to create options and hope for people living with ALS. And so I started by building multiple multidisciplinary ALS clinics and tele-ALS clinics so that people, even from far away, could continue to have access to somebody with a lot of knowledge about this disease, to hear about the FDA-approved therapies, both disease-modifying and symptomatic, to get access to a team of therapists so they could learn about exercise and nutrition and equipment that could make their lives better and longer. And I'm especially proud of the fact that I was able to put my own unique stamp on at least one of these clinics, which was the Duke ALS Clinic. So many of you also know something quirky about me is that I love really fun clothes. I just find that they create a positive energy for myself, and they also seem to rub off on people around me. And I really want to create that positive energy in my Duke ALS clinic. So once a month, my whole team has agreed to dress in the same theme. In fact, they now pick the themes. And so I've got to try to match what they come up with. But this picture here is actually from my favorite of all the themes that we had in our clinic. The theme that they picked was dress as your favorite superhero. So I came in dressed as Doctor Who, and everyone else on the team came in dressed as me, which was pretty special. So I've got a picture of that hanging right up over my desk. I also learned early in my career that we'd be much better together in partnership with patients, not considering patients to be subjects. And so I built something called the Clinical Research Learning Institute. It's a training program. It empowers people living with ALS to be more effective research partners. And then with those partners, I've designed and participated in multiple research studies, including clinical trials. And to me, that's the best way that I can give people hope is by designing new studies. Next slide. But there's a problem, and that is that most of the people that I've seen have not been able to participate in the clinical trials that are offered. And some of this is because the trials are becoming more and more exclusive. More and more now, sponsors want only patients who are very early in the course of their ALS with lots of function, progressing quickly. But sometimes people who meet those exclusion criteria can't participate because of the travel burdens, or sometimes they won't participate because they don't like some of the design features. And so I learned early on that the majority of people with ALS were instead self-experimenting with what I came to call alternative and off-label treatments, mostly vitamins and supplements that they primarily find on the internet. And so to try to help them make more informed decisions about those types of products, I created ALS Untangled. So ALS Untangled is good, and I'm proud of it. There's still nothing like it in any other field, but it's far from perfect. And so there still are a lot of questions about some of the products that we review. Like one persistent question that we're never able to answer is, what about the purity of some of these products? Like from different manufacturers, we know that the purity can vary wildly, but hardly anyone ever takes the time to systematically study. So for example, 5 different formulations of TUDCA. So people ask, which form of TUDCA should I take? And the answer is, I don't know, because I don't know of anyone who actually did those kinds of studies. The other problem is that when people self-experiment, we lose as a field the opportunity to learn from them. And I think that's the biggest tragedy of all, that most of the 4,000 people that I've seen and the tens of thousands of people that have been seen in other clinics did not contribute anything to our understanding of the disease. They did not move us forward in terms of finding better therapies. And so I've come to see expanded access programs as a solution to this problem. I think that they can provide a strong experimental option for people with ALS who can't be in clinical trials. And by strong, I mean, we know a lot about these products. For example, we know their purity. We know about their preclinical science. And even more importantly, when you're in an expanded access program, there's a way to obtain data. So our field can finally learn from all these people who are not participating in trials. Next slide. And so I'm proud that as I've been able to get more time to work on ALS, I've been able to offer expanded access programs in the Duke ALS Clinic. Now, I'm still far behind MGH in terms of the number of expanded access programs that I've been able to offer here, but I would say far more than most ALS clinics. So we've been able to offer 5 so far, and we have 2 more coming later this year. Next slide. These are not easy. First of all, there's not nearly enough expanded access programs in ALS. So for example, I told you I've seen 4,000 people with ALS in the last 23 years. I could offer a total of 64 of them an expanded access option. And I mean, I think the percentages are probably worse if we look at people with ALS in the United States and the number of spots in expanded access programs. It's a tiny percentage of folks that can get into these. The other thing is these require quite a few resources at a site, and some of those resources are not reimbursed. So they require fewer resources as you get better at them. But the first time I did an expanded access program, it took me 4 hours to get one person, one thing. Like that's not going to be sustainable. And in fact, a lot of attending physicians probably look at that and say, I'm not even getting into this because there's no way I could take 4 hours to get one person, one thing. And, I think there's a widespread lack of knowledge across ALS sites in terms of how to do these. Next slide. But I do see things changing. I mean, because of all of our patient partners, the amazing advocacy that they've done, I see in the next few years that there will be more expanded access programs. I hope by the end of my career to see a time when every person with ALS who can't get into a trial can participate in an expanded access program. We're still going to be a long way from that, but that's what I'd like to see. I do think that there's more site resources becoming available. So for example, at my institution in the last couple of years, there's now an entire office that is devoted to helping clinicians with startup and the conduct of expanded access programs. And of course, because of all of your work, we have the Act for ALS, which now allows the coordinating sites like MGH to offer reasonable budgets to folks who want to do these. But the thing is, that money's not going to last forever. And there's no guarantee that it's ever coming back. So to me, if this is something that we really care about and we want to solidify the ability of multiple sites to offer expanded access in ALS forever, the best way to do that is to create endowments. So what is an endowment? It's a pot of money that someone donates, and that money is never touched. That principal is never touched, but it goes into an account that earns interest. And the interest from that account forever can be used for a specific purpose. And so you might have seen in the beginning that I have a new title in the past year. I'm Duke's first endowed professor of ALS. And it's only because of that 3 families got together and created that position that in the past couple of years, I've been able to work full-time on ALS. And because I can work full-time, I can create more options and more hope. So it's a win-win. But I don't think a lot of people know about that sort of silo for creating programs at institutions. There are not many endowed professors of ALS, less than 10, I believe, in the whole United States. And I don't know of any expanded access program endowments. And in the meantime, while we wait for some of these things, my colleagues and I are trying to create training materials that'll empower knowledge so that more people will be able to at least know how to do these. So you know about the section of the NEALS website that I was able to help build with some resources from IMALS. I still believe that's one of the best single sources of information about how to run an expanded access program in the whole world. And now we have an annual expanded access program training session at our NEALS meeting. So I believe we've done it twice. Both times it was very well attended. The feedback was good. I think we empowered a lot of people who've never done this to at least understand how to do it. But I would love to see one more thing, and I've mentioned this a few times. I think the challenge is just trying to create an infrastructure, trying to find time to do it. I would love to see NEALS create an expanded access mentoring program. So, folks like Sabrina and Suma, and possibly one day me, when I get as much experience as the 2 of them, we'd be able to connect with someone at a site that's never done this via Zoom and just walk them through it. And if they run into problems, we'd be available to troubleshoot. So I really think that's, it's a grassroots effort, but I think that's going to make a big difference in terms of people being willing to do this if they have someone that's doing it that they can connect with. Next slide. So I think that's all I had to say about this, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Rick. Sabrina, should we hold on questions right now or take?
Yes. If you want to go ahead, Gwen, I think that would be great.
Sure.
I'm sure questions will keep coming. Yeah.
Actually, my piece is a great segue from what we just heard from Rick. So let me bring up a couple notes because I've been known to ramble. We don't want that. So first, hi, my name is Gwen Petersen. I was diagnosed with ALS at 32 years old. That was in 2018. I've got no family history of this disease, no genetic mutations found so far. So I'm kind of squarely in that mysterious sporadic cohort. So I'm super grateful for my friends at HEALEY for asking me to share my personal experiences with EAP. But when I got the invitation, I was thinking, well, it's kind of lame if I only talk about myself, kind of boring. So I wanted to bring to light other people's experiences with EAPs and really highlight our collective community voices. So I asked about 100 people all living with ALS across the United States the question you see on this slide, which is, if you have participated in an EAP or tried to get into an EAP, what was your experience like? I had 10 people respond, and here's what they said. So one person who happens to currently be participating in an EAP feels as though they are not getting any treatment effect, but they're continuing because it's easy and seamless, and they feel like it's the right thing to do. Thank you, participant. I heard from another person currently participating in an EAP, different from the last person. They told me that their site isn't very helpful, nor are they responsive, but the medicine is worth the hassle because they believe they're experiencing a positive treatment effect. I heard from 2 past EAP participants who said that they felt like VIPs because the protocol required participants to come in monthly and see the entire team. That they both told me they got a lot of value out of being monitored closely. 2 patients told me when they asked their neurologist about EAPs, that they didn't have any information. So it was kind of an example of patients bringing information to their doctors about current treatments, drugs, and the doctors not really knowing too much. And then the largest group of patients told me a couple of different things. One, that EAPs are too staff intensive. And the other thing, from those 4 patients, they told me their neurologist said, why would you even want to try that? There's no data or limited data to back up any positive signaling. I also 2 quick anecdotes and then I'm done. It came up a couple of times that once a site is set up to run an EAP, it can still take patients months to receive that first dose. And then someone else told me, one of the participants said, they said, wouldn't it be cool if doctors could provide personalized consultation with patients? For example, why one EAP would better serve, the patient versus another. So I'll stop there, and Sabrina, we can go to questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Ready? Dr. Bedlack and Gwen, thank you both so much for that information. And Dr. Bedlack, we all love your positive vibes and seeing what you're wearing, but Gwen's giving you a run for your money today. Thank you for that positivity, Gwen. So we have a bunch of questions coming in, and I'm gonna go ahead and start with Dr. Bedlack. Can you talk just a little bit about how EAPs help potential therapies get approved by the FDA and how they help move science forward?
Yeah, so let's start with the easy part. How can they move science forward? So one of the things that we're struggling with in ALS right now is that when we find drugs that seem to work, at least in one clinical trial, and they get approved by the FDA, like for example, Radicava and Relyvrio, those drugs were really only studied in a very small subset of patients. They're the patients that I told you about earlier that are early in their disease with lots of function, progressing at least an average rate. And so there are real questions about, do those drugs work in anyone else? Now, if you asked most of us, I think we would say yes. There's no reason to think that they wouldn't work in someone who is further along in the disease. But the fact is, we don't know for sure. And so insurance companies, being what they are, they seize upon this information and they say, we're not paying unless the person looks exactly like the one in the clinical trial. And, you know, they give us an opportunity to fight. That's called an appeal process. Eventually, you can get a peer-to-peer sometimes with an insurance company, and sometimes you win those battles. But the result of all that has been that it takes us about 100 minutes of clinician time per prescription for Radicava or Relyvrio now. And so you can kind of see why. I mean, I do have patients who come from other places and say, oh, they're not even offering that at that particular clinic. They say it's too staff intensive. They can't process those prescriptions. So, you know, I think as far as moving the field forward, if we could get data, whether it's efficacy data, which will be hard, because if a person is changing very slowly, you may need to follow them a long time to be able to see an effect on the disease, but at least safety and tolerability data. So you could at least go to the insurance company and argue, well, the drug is safe and tolerable, and the person, you know, they have a disabling, life-shortening illness. I mean, why would you not let us try this? I think we'd have better luck if we had that data. As far as what the FDA does, so remember, these are actually FDA programs. They came about in the early days of HIV. There's a movie called The Dallas Buyers Club for anyone who's really interested in how expanded access really started. It's a fantastic movie that explains, you know, how it all started in the HIV community. They didn't have the internet back then, but it was almost as bad. People would drive down to Mexico and they'd load up their station wagon with a bunch of supplements, and they'd come back and they'd sell them out of a hotel room as potential experimental therapies for AIDS. And people would line up. I mean, in Dallas, there were lines around this one guy's hotel room that was going down there to pick up these products. Now, this guy wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a scientist. And we see the same kind of thing happening now on the internet, that there's folks out there that are selling unusual treatments to people with diseases like ALS. So the FDA created these programs. I think it was a great idea. There's very specific rules to creating these programs. So if you're a doctor who wants to give a product to one of his patients, the first thing you have to do is you have to get an agreement with the company that owns the product. You know, some people think, well, you can just get anything you want. That's what right to try is all about. Well, right to try is kind of a misnomer. You don't actually have a right to try a product that a company owns. It's their product. They can decide whatever they want to do with it. Now we can reach out and ask the company, would you make this available? And, you know, companies are not allowed to make a profit on drugs that they use for expanded access programs. So the FDA is doing all it can to make sure that these programs protect patients. I mean, we don't want this to be the Wild West where companies are making outrageous profits off people with terrible diseases before their products are even proven to work. But the FDA also looks at what happens in expanded access programs from a safety and tolerability standpoint. And to be honest, this is one of the fears that we often have to get new companies over. They're afraid if they put their product into an expanded access program and something bad happens, that the FDA might shut down the whole development of their program. The fact is that has never happened in the entire history of expanded access across every single indication. Now, what has happened is that the FDA has noticed safety signals and asked the manufacturer to change the label of the eventually approved product. And again, that's a win for everybody. We learned about something that was happening to a group of patients that we wouldn't have known about potentially for years. And we probably, you know, kept people from getting harmed by that new information. So I don't think that an expanded access program for the foreseeable future will ever accelerate the approval of a drug, but certainly we can learn a lot more that will help us in the clinics and with the eventual label of the product.
Thank you, Dr. Bedlack. I know we're running out of time, but there are a number of questions. I'm going to try to get to you very quickly. The next question is, can you briefly tell us what an EAP is? I didn't realize we were using some acronyms that people might need to understand. And can you be in more than one EAP at the same time?
Yeah, EAP stands for Expanded Access Program. This is an FDA-approved pathway through which people with a serious, immediately life-threatening disease can get access to treatments that are in development, provided, certain rules are met, like I just talked about. So you couldn't be in an EAP if you were a candidate for a trial. So like someone comes to my clinic and they look like a great candidate for the HEALEY platform trial, but they say, no, I don't want to be in that trial. I want to be in your EAP. Can't. That's an FDA rule. You can't be in more than one EAP at the same time, at least so far. And again, that's kind of the same reasoning that we use for why you can't be in more than one trial at the same time. We're trying to learn about these products. Yes, we want you to be able to get access to things that might help, but we also have to learn from these programs. We have to learn about safety and tolerability. And, what if there's 2 experimental drugs out there that, when combined, they cause someone to turn purple? I mean, that could be a serious problem for both of those drugs. So we need to know how each one performs by itself. And that's the things that we can learn from trials and from expanded access programs. So one at a time.
Thank you. Gwen, I have a question for you. We've heard how expensive EAPs are to run and how difficult it is at the sites often. But we also hear the message sometimes, talk to your site about running an EAP, even though that's not always possible. So what advice would you give to potential participants who may not be able to get EAP at their site?
Can we pause and actually she stopped barking for a minute. You see her tail in the background. So question, oh, Daddy is coming to the rescue. Question was, what can patients tell sites as
how do they deal with that if they go, their site is not offering an EAP, but they're interested in participating in one?
I mean, I would personally, for me, I would have a bee in my bonnet. I would try and call the sponsor. I would see, I either call the sponsor or I've got the best doctor out there. No offense, Rick, but I would ask Sabrina. I would go to my doctor and say, here's what I'm up against. Can you help me? Or yeah, my first instinct though would be to try and call the sponsor or get their contact info. What's the right approach, Rick and Sabrina?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of who you decide to partner with as a patient is hopefully you find somebody who's passionate about the disease and willing to help you answer your questions. Now, if you went into a place and you said, hey, I'd like to be in an EAP, I know you don't have any now, but could you help me find one? And the doctor said, I can't do it right now this second because I'm way behind and people are yelling at me as I'm going into the next room. But I will get back to you in the next day or two. I will go online and try to see what's happening around here that you look like you might qualify for. That would be a reasonable approach. But if someone just shuts you down and says, why would you want to be in something like that? That might not be the best person to have as your care partner through this disease.
Agreed. And actually, I was early on, after my diagnosis, I came in contact with a neurologist who said those words to me. Why would you want to even try that? It's not proven. I don't think it works. And so, yeah, I kind of pivoted early on and went to someone else. What all of us might not be able to do that, right? So even if you want to come to me or come to Allison, come to our community members who have been through this and ask for help, please do.
Thank you. I'm going to quickly go through just 1 or 2 more questions. Dr. Bedlack, can you answer, is the eligibility requirements for each EAP different or the same? And do you ever foresee asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic carriers being part of an EAP?
Yeah, so I would say the first two inclusion criteria are the same. You have to have a serious, immediately life-threatening disease for which there's no satisfactory treatment, and you can't be a candidate for an ongoing clinical trial. Those are true of all expanded access programs that are happening right now. Now, each company that decides to offer an expanded access program will probably have some additional inclusion and exclusion criteria, hopefully not too many. And I think as these go along, we're starting to see broader and broader groups of people be able to qualify for these. But I don't see those first two things ever going away. And so that's where I think there's going to be a problem with an expanded access program for people who are pre-symptomatic. I'm not sure that the FDA would look at that situation and say, this is an immediately life-threatening disease. I mean, I definitely get why you'd want to take something. And I mean, maybe through advocacy, we could get them to broaden that. But at the way that it's worded right now, I don't think that that would be an option.
Last question, Dr. Bedlack, for you. How are EAPs funded, and do sponsors compensate the doctors and the clinics?
Yeah, so the short answer is they're usually not funded. So typically an expanded access program, especially if you want to do like a single patient expanded access program, there's no funding. Like somebody comes into my clinic tomorrow and says, hey, I want to take ibutylast. And, you know, I check and yeah, they have ALS and they're not a candidate for any of my trials. So I reach out to the company that makes ibutylast and I say, would you be willing to give this out, you know, without charging, making a profit on it? But they're not going to say, yeah, we'll give you that. Plus, you know, how much time you think it'll take? We'll pay you $500 an hour for your time. No, there's no resources like that with most expanded access programs. And that's why what's happening with Act for ALS is so different, so welcomed. That's why Sabrina's been able to, and her team have been able to get so many sites to participate in these expanded access programs, including sites that have never done it. So I think that's awesome. I mean, the first step toward getting people to offer these in the future is getting them to try it once. Because once you try it once, you realize, you know, it's not that bad and you learn some things and you can be more efficient next time. But I do worry that when Act for ALS is over, we're going to be back to where we were before, which is, you know, there's not going to be compensation for these things. And that's why I mentioned this idea of trying to create endowments at sites where the money from that endowment would be used to support a part-time person whose job would be running expanded access programs. Like I'm using my discretionary account to pay for part of a PA, a physician's assistant, who helps me run expanded access programs. Now, when that discretionary account's gone, I'm going to have to figure out what I'm going to do. But for right now, I can put her on a couple of the expanded access programs, and it saves me a ton of time because I don't have to do everything in those myself.
Thank you. So Dr. Bedlack and Gwen, on behalf of the whole team at the HEALEY Center, thank you for joining us today and taking the time to answer our questions. I do want to acknowledge for all of the people who joined us on this webinar today, we do have some questions about the platform trial. Please join us next week and Dr. Paganoni will answer those questions for you. To end, any last words from you, Dr. Bedlack or Gwen?
Just to say, I think it's incredibly exciting what's happened, and I'm very grateful to all of our patient partners. You know, without you, we wouldn't have had all this progress. I mean, we certainly wouldn't have all this expanded access. I'm very grateful to my colleagues, especially the ones at MGH. I mean, you've really been the thought leaders as far as expanded access in ALS. And so a lot of us, you know, who are starting to do this, we owe it to you for sort of lighting the way.
And I just want to say, I see people's really thoughtful comments in chat, and especially she's back, and especially around their experiences, some not so great with EAPs and clinics. Just want to say we see your comments, we're not overlooking them, and if I can help in any way, please get a hold of me. I'm not saying, you know, I have all the answers, but I've made some amazing contacts. A few of those are on this webinar, so please feel free to get a hold of me. And I've had so many colorful experiences in this disease, ranging from negative to positive, everything in between. So if I can help, would love to. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see everybody next week. Have a good week.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.